Hi, and welcome to this CloudOS Week Online video. This is part of the Empower People Centric IT series, and today we'll be talking about the Unified Device Management with Config Manager plus the Windows InTune service. My name's Steve Beaumont. I'm Technical Director at a company called Power On Platforms. We specialise in system-centered consultancy and providing rapid deployment solutions for private cloud and hybrid cloud technologies. I have a Twitter handle at StevieBSC. You're welcome to join me for my random collection of rambling thoughts. I'm also co-director for CloudOS Community alongside Simon Skinner, who will be presenting on a video later. It's a UK-based community dabbling in everything private cloud or CloudOS related, should I say. So that's system-centered technologies, Windows Server, Hyper-V virtualization, people-centric IT. I do have my own blog, that's systemcenter.blogspot.com. It's rather quiet at the minute because I'm busy transitioning a lot of my material across to the CloudOS community. There's a QR tag on screen for those that like to point their smartphone devices at the screen and grab a code rather than typing in links. I'm also co-author on the System Center 2012 Service Manager Cookbook and also the recently released Orchestrator Cookbook. These are two of the components of the further System Center suite. So today we're going to talk around Unified Device Management and how that's better with Configuration Manager and the integration into the Windows InTune cloud-based service for mobile device management. So today, some of the challenges that we face are our users, our customers, they pretty much expect to be able to work in any location that fits their needs and be able to still have access to all of their work resources they require to do their job. Biggest problem is they actually expect now to have this on any type of device that they feel is the best fit for their needs. Trouble is, this is actually starting to erode some of the approaches that we have to how we deliver the standards of IT for our organisation. As well as wanting to use any device, like I said, they still expect to be able to access the applications, so both the corporate applications and their personal applications that they feel benefit them in how they deliver their job and their work. And it's up to us to actually start to try and work out how we manage these applications across all these different platforms. So now we've got this influx of iOS devices, Windows RT devices, sometimes the Android as well. But most concerning, especially in my opinion, is actually the users still want to be able to access their corporate data. And it's how, as the IT professionals, we can actually provide this while still maintaining our compliance for our organisation and reducing the risk of exposure of leaking information. So how can we actually go about starting to empower this people-centric view of IT? How can we cope with the user's demands, the different devices, and also the applications and the data that they require to access across these multiple devices? Well, it's all about actually having that management layer in there, being able to control the access to what they need, but still protecting us at an organizational layer. So we have to be able to allow users to work on the devices of their choice, but still provide a consistent experience and access to the corporate resources with us in control as IT professionals. As well as being able to actually unify how we deliver the applications across both on-premise managed devices and as well via the cloud services to non-domain joined or outside of our control devices. And then we also need to look at how we can control the access to this corporate data. And some of the things I'll show you in this session today will help you actually achieve that. So the story so far. In 2012, we got this new version of Configuration Manager, so the 2012 version. And there was this mindset shift into how we actually deliver applications. So it went away from just targeting devices to actually a fairly logical approach, which is the users which use the applications. How can we target the application at them regardless of what device they're actually using? We also started to gain a bit of mobile device management capabilities through linking into the Exchange ActiveSync service. In June, we then actually gained more control over mobile devices through the introduction of a Windows InTune solution. Now this was a cloud-based solution, and it actually started to allow us to look at actually loading applications, or what we call side-loading applications, onto the devices for iOS devices, so your iPhones, your iPads. But again, we only had a lot of the policy control through the Exchange Active Sync functionality. So we was relying on the profiles being registered on the devices to our Exchange or Office 365 infrastructures to be able to control things like passwords and pins. So in September, along came Server 2012. Now this brought in some massive improvements around remote desktop services, so both the virtual desktop infrastructure in traditional manner for client-based, as well as session-based. And it's that RDP8 protocol that also allowed some radical changes in the way and the speed of delivery of these sessions to the users. We also gained some control around how we actually share out files. So this was using a dynamic access control, which moved away from just relying on users being in groups on how we set up share permissions, to actually being able to do more granular control based on file classifications, whether the user's in the right OU, or whether they're actually on a corporate approved device and what type of device that was. And there's also some improvements around direct access or remote access services in general. If you haven't already looked at the technology in Server 2012 for direct access, not only is the actual implementation a lot easier, but it's a very cool technology that allows a seamless connection to your network for Windows devices. In December, we actually gained the first service pack for Configuration Manager. Now, not only does this bring in support for some of the new technology like Windows 8 and Server 2012, it also started to unify the experience between Configuration Manager and InTune. So whereas InTune was a cloud-only based service, with the Service Pack 1 release, we gained a connector that allowed us to actually connect in from our on-premise infrastructure into this cloud-based service to actually consume the information of the devices enrolled. So we gained a better understanding of the actual mobile devices out there that are being used to access our services, but also then we can actually start to control things like the policies and the software distribution from within that one console being Configuration Manager, and push that settings out to the InTune service, which the devices will then get affected by. We also gained some macOS support for internally within our infrastructures. MDM support was also added for the Windows RT devices and Windows Phone 8 alongside the iOS that was already there. In June, along came Configuration Manager R2 version. Now again, this built on the configuration, the integration that was provided for Windows InTune in Service Pack 1, and gave us a much deeper set of control. So rather than relying on just purely the EAS or the ActiveSync policies to provide things like PIN, passwords, enforcement on devices, we now gained a lot more granular set of controls over the device. We also brought in things like the corporate portal to be able to actually have users sign up and then see a common experience for accessing applications that we provision, as well as being able to do things like selective wipe. So I'll talk about selective wipe a little bit more later, but this is the idea. Rather than actually, if a user leaves the organization and we wipe their device and remove all of their personal settings, we can actually now start to choose just taking away the corporate information that was provisioned onto that device. We also gained some cool things around being able to actually deploy out some certificate devices, set things like VPN, or even better, Wi-Fi settings, so we don't need to give out users the actual keys for our internal hidden infrastructures, or have a manual task to actually apply them. Alongside that, Windows Server 2012 R2 was also launched, and that gained some new features to help with this whole bring your own device or choose your own device scenarios. And these were around work folders and workplace join. Now these features can actually be enabled via Configuration Manager console, pushed out to the Windows InTune, and actually help users to access some of their corporate data. In February, we saw yet another release of Windows InTune. Now this is where the whole built in the cloud first approach starts to make a lot more sense. It's a lot easier for Microsoft to enable features in a much more rapid cadence release, and turning features on than having to wait for large service packs or cumulative updates, or even feature R releases of an in-house product and wait for people to upgrade to gain the benefits. So Microsoft actually turned on some new features, which are things like the email profile push. So we can now actually define how we want users to be able to connect for their email. So things like we can set all the base configurations of what server names, auto-enrollment settings, push that down to a device that is enrolled, and the user gains their corporate email. We can now also do things like actually remotely locking a device if they've lost it, or actually resetting a PIN for a user if they're that forgetful. And obviously, again, with this whole idea of things being released a lot more rapidly and being able to enable features for them, iOS 7 was released, and we was able to gain the actual management features of iOS 7 very rapidly without having to do any upgrade to our internal infrastructure, just by actually consuming one of the new features that's pushed down from Windows InTune. So the question is, should you go for a cloud-only approach and just use Windows InTune, or should you go for more unified where you actually link it into Configuration Manager? So obviously the Windows InTune can be used just purely standalone through a web console, so you can access it directly, log in, and you have a very simplified console where you can do the basic administration, set things like some basic policies, and also push out software and see your inventory estate. Now, the biggest thing to actually mention on this one is it is probably more suited for organisations that have between 7,000 and 4,000 users. As soon as you start going above that, and I do recommend this for organisations that are smaller than 4,000 user set, especially if they have Configuration Manager already in place, the preferably R2 release, and that's because you do then get that, to coin a phrase that's used often, that single pane of glass approach. So not only can you actually then start to manage your in-house laptops and desktop devices, you can now see your mobile devices, so your tablets and your smartphones, alongside the other devices you're already used to managing. You get a complete view across your estate from that one console. You get a lot more granular control over your policies then. You can start to use the design configuration or your baselining within Configuration Manager to set very detailed policy requirements. You obviously get a lot higher scale as well, so it goes up to 100,000 devices, as well as gaining that much richer control from an administrative perspective around things like role-based access control, so you can delegate just purely mobile device management administrators, or hand it over to your asset configuration teams without exposing the entire console. We also get things like the PowerShell commandlets that can help with doing some automation tasks, and some deep, rich reporting capabilities through SQL reporting services and access to the back-end database that contains all this information, as opposed to the cloud-based one where you're limited to the reports that Microsoft basically give you. So when we start to talk about unified device management, we do have this single console. That single console connects to your on-premise Configuration Manager R2 installation, where you will see your Windows PCs and your Windows embedded devices, and even your Windows to go. That is your little USB sticks which you've commissioned with a corporate image on it. So alongside the Mac OS support that came in with the Service Pack 1 release, when you put that link in, you immediately gain alongside the capabilities to support Windows RT devices. So these were the devices that Microsoft touted and everyone went, but they're no good for enterprise environments because they can't domain join them. However, you are now starting to gain the benefits of using them within an enterprise environment because you can manage them alongside things like Windows Phone, iOS and Android devices. So we're starting to look at how we can now enable users to work from anywhere. We have an access control method now. We can start to see the devices. We can start to control how we want them to be used. We can set policies on them. So now we can actually start to provide what access we want. So for a start, we can actually start to see users that want to register their devices using our Active Directory services. So this could either be using across the web, either the Azure Active Directory Federation services. So they have a Windows Azure Active Directory service that can be either linked in using Active Directory Federation services or a tool called DIR Sync. But they start to have that seamless experience as they're using their domain corporate credentials to log on and enroll their devices. Now, if they start to sign up for this workplace join, or they can enroll it within Configuration Manager, and then we can start to provide the services that we say are best to be used on that type of device. So for devices that are capable of doing direct access or have VPN capabilities, so especially the Windows RT devices, some of the third-party VPN solutions are available for them, along with iOS, which has VPN support as well. Or we can start to publish back out directly to devices the URLs and reverse proxy them into our environment web applications. So this might be your intranet or your internal SharePoint applications that we can present directly to the users without them having to remember long complicated URLs. We can actually provision the URLs and have them as apps or icons on their devices to immediately access. Along with being able to actually start to publish out the actual connection ports for things like VDI infrastructure provided by remote desktop services that we can configure the links to so users can gain access back. Now this could be on an iPad device, for example, where there is now a proper RDP application on the device that we can publish the settings into via InTune. So users can actually start to look at bringing it in, and as I mentioned, they have this capability to actually join the device using their domain credentials. Now if they choose to actually do the full workplace join, they do gain a certificate on the actual devices, but more importantly we start to see the objects actually within Active Directory due to the link between the Active Directory Federation services and the Windows Azure Active Authentication service that links them together. It also allows us to do really cool things around multi-factor authentication. For example, you can actually sign up for a service that's offered by Azure to actually send a text message to a user's registered phone device, so they get a one-time code that they have to actually apply to actually log into the service and gain access to resources. And obviously going via Windows InTune, they get this company portal. So this is an application that they will use as an interface into, well, it's your internal app store. It shows the applications and the services that you present to the user in a controlled manner. And then linking into the configuration manager, you can start to pull all this information together and get a complete view across both the on-premise and the cloud managed services. So what's new in some of the new features within the R2 and the latest version of the InTune release? Well, one of the main things is this idea of being able to actually see the inventory of the devices. So there's two distinct categories when we talk about mobile devices and the usage within Configuration Manager, and that is pure personal devices and also company issued devices. So we have the ability to actually define which devices the company has or the organization has issued users. So with this distinction, because most devices when they're registered will be by default registered as personal devices, it means that if a personal device is managed by the organization's infrastructure, it will actually only inventory the corporate issued settings and applications applied to the device. So it has a layer of protection there for the user's privacy, where they might have been hesitant about linking it into the infrastructure because they have some applications they'd rather you not see. Then as long as it is marked as a personal device, that issue is negated. However, when we do apply the corporate device policy, we can see everything on the device. So it allows us to still maintain that level of access when we can tell whether users have been installing applications outside of our remit control. And this obviously flows through the Configuration Manager infrastructure into the different global conditions that we use within Configuration Manager to actually define how we want things to install, whether we don't want certain things applying to personal devices as opposed to properly corporate asseted devices. So I mentioned earlier about this whole remote access, so things like the VPN profiles and setting out the Wi-Fi. So these are some of the new features that we're starting to gain. So with being able to push these from a central location, one of the first things for me is certainly around the Wi-Fi profiles. If you have any sort of hidden SID infrastructure where you don't necessarily want the users to gain access to things like pre-shared keys or the SID names, this is where you can actually define them as a profile So as soon as that device is enrolled over the air, so a 3G connection or some public Wi-Fi, it will then apply the settings for your corporate without any need of interaction from either the user or your IT admin staff. So it immediately removes the burden from the IT, and it also keeps your information secure from users. So you can apply this across the Windows 8.1 and the iOS and Android. Hopefully soon we should see support for some of the Windows Phone features gaining access to things like this with the release of Windows Phone 8.1, which should hopefully be announced around the build time, which is actually this week or next week, I believe, depending on when you're watching this. So the VPN profile management, we've got support for some of the major SSL VPN vendors in there. So we'll see the Cisco clients, Juniper, Checkpoint. Obviously, you can read the slides on the screen. And we have a subset of them for the Windows RT devices, because obviously the Windows RT is a very closed platform. It's still Windows based, but it's ARM, so you can't install some of the stuff on the actual ARM side. And that is where the VPN profile settings would live rather than a modern style application. Obviously the normal VPN standards are in there, and we can start to make it a lot more automatic for the users. So especially within the Windows 8.1 or the iOS, we can use the DNS names and it will connect automatically and establish them on demand when an application actually requires it. I've mentioned about the whole Wi-Fi side of things, but we also have the ability to start distributing some of our internal certificates. So that's fine when you have an internal PKI infrastructure for domain joined devices, because you can distribute them through Active Directory and group policy. However, for a non-domain joined device, it's always been a little bit more difficult and a manual task. Now we can start to actually specify and push out certificates as we see fit. So coming back to work folders that I mentioned, this is one of the new features in Windows Server 2012 R2 and Windows 8.1 devices. So it's important to note that this is not at the moment fully fledged in the iOS devices or the Android devices. It's mainly concentrating around the Windows 8 devices, or the Windows 8.1, sorry. And this is where we actually allow, if the user enrolls for it or we push out the configuration through Configuration Manager, it will actually create a connection for that device to our personal documents within our infrastructure, where we can then keep it in sync. So if you think like home folders, for example, they can have access to that on their non-domain joined devices, but they are then controlled. So there's an encryption layer, and we also have that ability to remove that data when we feel fit to remove that data. So we still maintain that level of control. It helps prevent the leakage of company data, and it stops users just randomly copying them to devices which is out of our control. So we have the ability to, like I say, to push this from Configuration Manager, and the actual company portals now have links directly to them, so users don't have to think about where they have to go to get to that data. So I keep mentioning about this whole idea of being able to control and reduce the risk to us as an organization by allowing users to actually use different types of devices or their own devices. So if you think about a user that actually has their tablet to hand and they've got their own data on there, they've got the family pictures, and they've obviously got their own apps, so let's say Angry Birds is going to be on there. Now they enroll their device for their organization because they feel they can actually sit on the settee at home and do some more productive work in their own time. So we then obviously give them access to our company applications. We might have some recommended applications that will publish to them via the company portal from the store, and obviously some links into our VDI infrastructure. Our policies will enforce some passwords on there and give them access to some of our centralized data, either via the VDI connections or directly onto the device using work folders. Now that user goes on train journey and loses that device. Worst case scenario, it may be stolen. They ring the help desk and say, I'm really, really sorry, but my iPad's gone. Can you do something about it? Because it has got some really critical company data on there. So apart from the worry that it should be encrypted, we can now actually invoke from Configuration Manager via the Windows InTune service that as long as that device has or as soon as that device gets a Wi-Fi or 3G connection, it will remove all data. So this will remove both the company data and the user's personal data. Now, I don't think a user is going to be too bothered if we remove their personal data if the device is lost or stolen, because we're helping them out with removing any of their sensitive data. They might have their own financial banking details and stuff on there that they don't want somebody getting hold of. So the other scenario is going to be a device where the user actually leaves the organization, or it might be an old enough device that we're retiring it and we're going to actually sell it on or give it to our employees. So in this type of scenario, we don't want to necessarily remove the personal data that's on that device. We just want to make sure that our organizational data is safe. So we can do what's called a selective wipe and just remove our corporate information off that device while still leaving intact all the user's personal information. So just to go back over some of the things that we talk about. So we have these different layers that we can actually start to apply to devices. So what I call unregistered devices, these are basically just devices which are out in the wild that users might have accidentally or purposely known the method to actually connect their email client on that device to your Office 365 or your Exchange infrastructure. So these are unregistered devices where they get access to their email. We have some very basic policies we can apply to them, things like must have a PIN code on them, and we have the ability to actually block that device. Now, as you start to move up the stack and we actually enroll them into a mobile device management solution such as InTune on its own, then we start to gain a much more granular control. We can start to see information about that device. We can start to selectively wipe that. We can get some compliance reports off it to make sure it's not got certain applications that we don't want on there. As we then start to move right across to that fully managed experience where we bring in Configuration Manager and we get a lot more detailed control over not just the mobile devices, but also your entire estate with that seamless, unified experience. And again, going back to this whole difference between full and selective wipe. So the full wipe is available on any type of Windows Phone, iOS or Android. It's not available on a Windows full-fat Windows 8.1 device or Windows RT device because it's hard to do a selective wipe on a full-blown Windows client. We can, however, start to do selective wipe across the entire range of devices. So email can be pulled off from a device or blocked from a device through just simply Exchange ActiveSync. Or we get more detailed, we can actually start to look at removing the corporate apps that we provision to devices through Configuration Manager and InTune, the tie between them. We can selectively just remove them, as well as all these different things around VPN and WiFi profiles. Certificates would just revoke actually on the server side itself, rather than removing the certificate, so that we know that that certificate is not accepted anymore across the entire estate. And obviously the settings and any settings are removed. Management agents aren't actually applicable across some of them because they're actually baked into the operating system themselves. However, we do remove profiles off of the iOS devices. And obviously corporate data as well, we can remove off a device if it suits us, using that whole workplace join and removing the settings from the selective wipe. So thank you very much for listening through to this session. Obviously, my name is Steve Beaumont, Technical Director of Power and Platforms. You can contact me via the various methods, so either on the Twitter handles or by my email address there. I suggest you go and have a look around the whole CloudOS website in general. There's lots of details there, both on empowering people-centric IT and Configuration Manager and that Windows InTune service. Feel free to drop across to our CloudOS community website. Get involved in the different blogs and the conversations getting on there, and also various other events that we tend to do within the community around the United Kingdom. Please have a look at the conversation that's going on Twitter. Follow us on the hashtag of UKMVPCloud. Ask any questions, get involved. We'll try our best to answer you. Thank you very much.